Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about how to synthesize sources. So let's define what synthesis means. Synthesis is a process to bring things together. Now, it doesn't mean that those things are like each other, but you are going to make sense of them through this process of synthesis. And that's really important as we go further. So let's talk about this. Before you can bring sources together, you need to understand them. You need to know what it is you're trying to combine. So this means that you have to recognize whether or not the sources that you're talking about are biased or not. And that's really important, because if you have sources that disagree with each other and they're both biased, you need to know that to help make whatever point that you're trying to make. If they're not biased, then that really helps you, because you don't have to address that. They have their own credibility, which is incredibly useful. But you need to be aware. You need to understand that about your source. You also need to know the main points that each of your sources make. And by doing that, you can start to understand how these sources relate to each other. So let's say you've got 10 sources, right? They're all credible. You don't have to worry about bias. You understand the points that they're each trying to make, and you understand how those relate to each other. Well, you can start to see the picture that they paint together. And that is where synthesis starts to be possible. Because you see, this source talks about this part of the argument. This source talks about this part of the argument. These sources all kind of overlap, so I can kind of lump them together, and you see how you can help to justify any decision you've made or argument you're trying to make, because you've got people and sources to back you up. Okay. So after you understand your sources, you need to know how to use them to support you. So again, you need to be able to identify which sources are most relevant, right? You might have sources that talk about all the same things and make the same points, and that's great. Which source is most relevant to the point that you're trying to make? Now, figuring out relevance means really understanding your source again. That might be finding the best author. That might mean deciding which source is most current, so maybe the newest source, or whatever criteria you use. But you have to be able to decide which are most relevant and use the sources for their best purposes. Okay? Once you've done that, then you can choose the quotes, the summaries, the paraphrases from each of these sources that best represent the source, but that help you to make your claim best of all. And again, that as part of doing, and we'll talk about this in a second, you need to use as part of using your sources effectively, you need to not overdo it, right? You don't just take a big chunk of the source and drop it in and expect your reader to understand it. You need to use it well. And so when you reference your sources frequently, the most effective way to do that is to use little bits and to explain it. And we're going to talk about that in just a bit. You also want to use a variety of sources. If your reader sees that you're just using one source over and over and over and over again, and then you kind of throw in a couple others at the end, it's going to seem unbalanced. It's like, why is this one so much more valuable than the others? You might look lazy. You might look like you don't actually understand the topic. So what you really want to do, the most effective way to make a point, is to use lots of sources and to use them frequently. That variety also helps to build your credibility, because you look like you're not avoiding anything, you just understand the whole issue. Okay, so again, about using your sources effectively, and I've talked about this in another video. To be effective, you want to use a process kind of like this. You give attribution to your source by introducing the relevant information about it. So the first time you use the source, you want to introduce it. and explain why it's significant to the point that you're trying to make. Then you use the actual content of the source. I call this quotation. Use the actual content of the source, which this could be a quote, this could be a paraphrase, this could be a summary. Whatever is appropriate for the moment. After you use that content, you also need to cite it, because this is not only the right thing to do, it gives credit to the author, it also helps to establish your credibility. Because when you use the academic process correctly, it helps to be more persuasive, because you look like you know what you're doing. Okay, you follow that up with perhaps the most important step, which is by explaining the significance of the content you just referenced in detail. And then you explain how that relates back to the point that you're trying to make. So if you miss this step, you are taking a huge gamble and you're making a mistake, because you are assuming that the reader knows or understands what you want them to get out of the source. Don't leave the interpretation of the source up to the reader. Be explicit. Say exactly what you want them to get out of the source. By doing that, it's going to be effective. Okay. Having done that, the other problem that you might run into is misusing or misinterpreting the source. And that leads to you committing logical fallacies. Now, logical fallacies are misrepresentation of the information, either by you not using it correctly, you not understanding it correctly, or just using it out of context or something like that. Does that make sense? So what you want to do under no circumstances do you want to misrepresent information, because that just makes you look bad and it's incorrect, which isn't persuasive. Then you also, to avoid this, you want to summarize the best argument of the opposing viewpoint. And if you have that source, that's incredibly effective, because it helps to support that you understand what you're talking about when you use the explicit, accurate words of others, right? When you are just citing from things consistently and accurately and from a broad range of viewpoints, you look like you completely understand the issue, which you should if you went through a reasoned process. But it also helps to support that. You know what you're doing, and you're avoiding mistakes, which will hurt your credibility. Okay, once you've done that, then you can use your source material to respond to the others and your own logic and reason as well. When you bring credible sources into every aspect of your argument, it helps to paint not just a picture, but your picture about the issue, right? And that's ultimately what you're trying to accomplish with the paper. You want to make a claim that adds something to the world. And maybe it's been said by others, but by using your perspective, you help to add something as well. Using sources helps you to do that. It helps you look credible, it shows that you understand the topic, and it helps to prove your point. Now, I'm careful when I say prove your point, because it's really hard to prove anything. It helps to support or justify the point that you're trying to make. So it's incredibly important that you use sources. And when you recognize the value of different sources, you will understand them. You see how they agree or disagree with each other. The thing that connects all of it is the argumentation process that you're using and your understanding of what it is that you're using in the first place. That's how you can make sources that don't agree with each other agree, because that's where they fit in together, is they're all unified by the same topic and the same theme. And so when you use it for their most relevant use cases, they help to prove your point. So thank you for watching this video. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, ask me in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.